This is Curl Up with a Cattail, and I'm Gwen Cooper, the New York Times bestselling author of numerous cat-centric titles, including Homer's Odyssey, A Fearless Feline Tale, or How I Learned About Love and Life with a Blind Wonder Cat, Spray Anything, More True Tales of Homer and the Gang, and The Book of Possum, Head Bonks, Raspy Tongues, and 101 Reasons Why Cats Make Us So happy. We're here to celebrate all things feline and to tell inspirational cat tales. Let's get started. Hello, and welcome to an all-new episode of Curl Up with a Cattail with Gwen Cooper. I am, of course, Gwen Cooper, your host, and delighted, as always, to be here with you today. And it occurred to me, I say that every week, right? I'm delighted, as always, to be here with you today. I don't want you guys to think that that is a pro forma thing that I say. I am genuinely and legitimately delighted to be here with you. It really is just such a great thing that modern technology has brought us to a point where I can just talk to you guys, separate and aside from the books that I write, which I also like to think of as being part of a great ongoing conversation that all of us have about cats. And speaking about conversations about cats, that was Clayton chiming in. Clayton is very, very feisty this morning, or attention seeking, I think is perhaps a better way of putting it. What's the matter, Clayman? What's the matter? So there you go. Clayton speaks at long last. And Clayton, this is what Clayton does to me all day. Clayton, it's actually interesting that this is happening on today's episode because later on in today's episode, we are going to be speaking with journalist, filmmaker, cat mom extraordinaire, and my very dear friend, the delightfully named Melanie Morningstar, will be joining us from Sydney, Australia. And we will be talking about two cats who Melanie has adopted in recent years, both of whom are special needs, by dint of the fact that they have special emotional needs. Both cats have suffered great abuse in the past, and as a result, were and are cats who do not bond well or easily with people. Let's say these are not cuddly, sweet, crawl into your lap cats. And Melanie is going to talk a little bit about the challenges and the rewards of adopting and working with cats who have special emotional needs. So the reason I'm chuckling a little bit is not at all because this is a humorous subject, but because when Melanie, and you will hear her talk about how these are cats who really are just very reluctant to be touched or to be cuddled. They are very afraid because the human attention that they've received in the past has been so dangerous for them and painful, who are really not seeking human attention. And of course, all the way at the other end of that spectrum is my cat, Clayton, who cannot get enough human attention, and who even now, as I am talking and he's being quiet, but he is circling my chair and bonking my ankles with his head, and is just very frustrated that I'm not paying attention to him. So that's coming up later on in today's episode, and it's a topic that I wanted to address for a number of reasons. And one obviously is my own history with adopting special needs cats, or with advocating for special needs cat adoption. Although I do want to be clear that there is literally no such thing as a bad rescue. So I am in no way besmirching anybody who adopts a cat who is perfectly healthy and quote unquote normal, physically, emotionally, across the board. There is literally no such thing as a bad rescue. Any rescue is saving a life. And I say this because I have one very dear friend, another dear friend who is a cat mom and who was actually a journalist for Time magazine at the time that I met. That's how we met, is she was somebody who covered Homer's Odyssey when it first came out, these many years ago. And she and I have since become very good friends. And she kind of still tortures herself with the memory of a club-footed kitten who she did not adopt at her local ASPCA, and she wasn't sure that she was the right person for this cat, and she ended up adopting another cat who did not have any physical health issues. And I think she thought that I was going to judge her, like I had adopted a cat with no eyes. And so if she had not chosen to adopt this cat with a club foot, that I don't know, that I in some way judge her or her rescue to be lesser than my own. And of course, nothing could be further from the truth. And the thing that I always tell her to kind of assuage whatever residual guilt she still seems to feel about this is that there is no such thing as a bad rescue. And so I do want to emphasize that. By the same token, this is a topic, though, that I have wanted to discuss because we always, as cat lovers, we always talk about this idea that our cats choose us. And I certainly think that that is very often the case. And it is a lovely and very romantic idea. But it is, of course, not always the case, right? That our cats choose us. And this was actually something that I wrote about in the first essay in my collection, My Life in a Cat House. For those of you who have read it will know that my cat Scarlet and I, it was almost like an arranged marriage. I wanted to adopt a kitten. My mechanic, or my boyfriend's sister's mechanic at the time, had found this litter of kittens who needed a home. And so I committed to taking one of these kittens, and Scarlet was not a particularly affectionate cat. And I don't know, while she certainly needed a human's physical care, I don't think Scarlet would have fared well for herself out in the wild as a feral cat. She really did not need anything emotionally from humans, certainly not when I first adopted her. And we did fall in love with each other, but it was very much a relationship that grew between us, and that was based on a lot of mutual effort and mutual understanding that developed over a period of months and years. And it was certainly a very rewarding experience. It was an incredibly rewarding experience, but it was not the case that she chose me, or even necessarily that I chose her. Like I said, it was sort of like an arranged marriage. I would encourage those of you, and I rarely do this, I try not to do such blatant pushes for my own writing. But if you have not yet read My Life in a Cat House, I certainly hope you will do so. I do feel that this story, and it's the first story in the collection, it's called I Choo Choo Choose You. And I actually, I have a long and grand tradition of not really liking the things that I write. I'm not really a huge fan of my own writing. Every so often, though, I write something that I actually think is pretty good. And I think that story about Scarlet is actually one of my better pieces of writing. It's probably my favorite thing that I have written, which does not necessarily count for much, but there you have it. That's my opinion. I do find it very difficult to read things that I have written. I find myself cringing. It just never seems quite good enough, which I always think is one of those things that, on the one hand, that is what makes you, whatever your creative endeavor is, not quite being satisfied with what you do is what makes you keep pushing yourself to be better. But of course, on the other hand, it can also just lead to all kinds of neuroses and insecurities and blah, 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 blah. But that is, of course, this is a podcast and not a therapy session. So we will move on from that topic. But yes, Melanie is here to discuss a subject that is very near and dear to my heart. And also in a broader context, to discuss the relationships that we have sometimes with our pets that do need work. And it doesn't always have to be a question of an animal having a background of abuse or hostility or aggression. Again, as we all know, our cats all have their quirks and their foibles. And some cats do require a little bit more effort to understand than others. And so I don't want to dismiss this idea that our cats choose us, because I do think that very often is the case. I just don't want to normalize that so much that it makes it seem like people who find themselves in a relationship with a cat that is taking a little bit or a lot of work think that something is wrong, that something is not going the way it's supposed to, because that is not the case. And just like with any other, marriage, I as a person who's been married for a while, I definitely, I am in love with my husband, who I believe is in love with me, but that does not mean that we sail every day of our lives in sunny waters or that marriage does not take work. And I think any worthwhile relationship takes a little bit of work, and that certainly can and often does include our relationships with our cats. Anyway, Melanie and I, because we are old friends catching up, so it's a little bit of a long conversation and I want to leave plenty of time for that. So I am going to get right to thanking my Patreon supporters, giving them their monthly shout out. And of course, it is thanks to you, my Patreon community, that I am able to produce this podcast and to write my books independently of corporate sponsorships or traditional publishing companies. And I encourage you to check out my Patreon community and all the fun perks that Patreon supporters get. You can go to patreon.com/Gwen Cooper, and that's P as in Peter, A, T as in Thomas, R as in Robert, E-O, N as in Nancy.com/Gwen Cooper. If you didn't hear your name last week and you don't hear your name this week and you are a Patreon supporter at the $5 level or higher, rest assured that you will hear your name next week. And so a big thank you to Janice Rogensky, Sarah Hakes, Kathy Schlichterline, Margaret Ald Louie, Stephanie Peters, Heather Hambrick, Eileen Kaiser, Wendy Lynch, Shannon Carter, Ronna Miller Owen, Zoe Shino, Amy Norris, Kathleen Winger, Catherine Birch, Susan Ann Cadlick, Treese England, Patty Ackerman, Allison Walls, Julie Garrett, Mary De La Cruz, Charles Brackney, Michelle Zarickney, Jeffrey Lewis, and Kaylee Quimby. And of course, if I have mispronounced your name, I am so sorry. And please do feel free to send me an email at gwen@gwencooper.com correcting my error. Big thank you to all of you for your incredible support. And even more, by the way, than the financial support that allows me to keep doing this is just the knowledge that you guys are in my corner, and the moral support that comes along with it really does keep me going. And on that note, we are going to take a brief pause of about 30 seconds or so. And when we come back, we will be speaking with Melanie Morningstar. So sit back, relax, get comfortable, and stick around for more Curl Up with a Cattail. Much for sticking around. I am truly thrilled to introduce today's guest, a journalist and filmmaker with a long and distinguished career during which she's worked for storied outlets including, but not limited to, Time, A Current Affair, The Evening Standard, and 60 Minutes. As a producer for 60 Minutes Australia, she spent 3 months traversing Honduras and Guatemala, hunting down and ultimately assisting in the capture of Robert Dolly Dunn, who is Australia's most wanted criminal at the time. Her films have been official selections at numerous international festivals, including the Key West Film Festival, the Berlin Film Festival, and the Cannes Film Festival. She currently lives in Sydney, Australia, but has previously lived in Colombia, Los Angeles, and, of course, South Beach, Florida, where she and I first met nearly 25 years ago on adjacent bar stools at 821 on Lincoln Road. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Melanie Morningstar, the lovely named Melanie Morningstar. Hello.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Yeah, great. You know, it's Sydney summertime. The weather's crazy. Some days it's like 100 degrees. Some days it's like 50 and raining, So, typical Sydney summertime.
I hate being that sort of ignorant American, but it is really always hard for me to get my head around the idea that it's summer for you right now, even though it's January.
Correct. In fact, I once had a friend when I was living in New York who said to me, she was going to Australia, and she said, now this was December, right? So she was coming in the summertime, and she said to me, now when I get to Australia, it's going to be July, right? Because in her mind, July was summer. Right, she couldn't get her head around the fact that she was.
It's the same calendar, just different weather associated. I mean, I sort of get that. Obviously, growing up in Miami, where it's warm all year round, so our January was still pretty balmy. And I can't believe it is so long ago since you and I first met. And you were really, I guess, the person who spans kind of both parts of my writing career, where I was first writing, about South Beach and Scandal and things like that. And now I write about cats and other warm-hearted and more positive things. And I don't even think I knew when you were living on South Beach and we were friends there that you were a cat person.
I had a cat. I rescued Shirley from, you remember Hurricane Andrew?
Of course.
I went out there. I'd only been in Miami Beach about a month, I think, when that hit.
Welcome to Miami.
Yeah, right. And so I went out there, obviously, to take photos. I was doing voice interviews with the Current Affair US with Steve Dunleavy. And so I was out there sort of doing what they call a color piece, just describing what it was that I was seeing. And I heard this plaintive little meow, and I dug this tiny little cat out of the rubble.
Oh.
And I went and dropped her at the shelter, and they said, well, are you going to take her? And I said, well, I hadn't planned on it. And they said, well, we'll have to, put her down. And I said, I'll be back at 5. I'll pick her up. So there was this big note on her cage saying, Melanie Morningstar will be back by 5 to pick this cat up. So that was dear little Shirley. And we grew up together. I took her out to LA when I moved out to LA. We were together for about 14 years, I think.
That is a long time. And was she your first cat?
No, I've had cats since I was 18 or 17, really. My first cat was this gorgeous little Russian blue who I named Maya, who didn't have a collar, and it was the days before microchips. And she just basically followed me home, and I'd stop and turn around and she'd still be behind me. She was just a kitten. And so I took her home and looked after her. I put, notes on electric poles and notes in local shops and stuff, is this your cat? And no one ever answered me. So Maya was my first cat.
I'm going to use this actually as a segue, that story, because of course we always talk as cat lovers about how cats choose us. And there really is this idea, this almost mystical idea that the cats we are meant to be with choose us, that it is at least as much their choice as it is our choice. But sometimes it really is our choice. And the cat emphatically has not chosen us. And this is actually part of what I want to discuss with you today, that the reason specifically that I wanted you on the show, other than the fact that I have not talked to you for so long, and I just love hearing your Australian accent on the other end of my microphone. But you are currently living with a cat. You've rescued a cat named Jeremy, and you recently lost a cat named Gypsy. And both of these are cats who I would call special needs, not because of any physical differences or disabilities that they may have, but because emotionally, they have been through some traumatic experiences that make it very difficult for them to bond with humans. And of course, this is the kind of thing that can lead to cats languishing in shelters. Many cats obviously don't make it out of shelters or in an open intake shelter environment are put down because of this. And these are the kinds of cats you specifically requested and chosen to adopt. So I want to talk to you a little bit about, about Jeremy and Gypsy and their personalities and what it is that has drawn you specifically to these cats who can find it difficult to bond with people. Let's talk a little bit about Jeremy at first. Why don't you tell us how he has come to live with you?
Well, this is an amazing story. I think it's an amazing story in retrospect. My friends had made a donation in Gypsy's name to the RSPCA, which is like the ASPCA in America.
And I'm sorry, just to give we are going to talk about Gypsy too, but you had recently lost Gypsy at this point.
I had recently lost Gypsy I was about 2 months at that point, or maybe 3 months. And so they made a donation in Gypsy's name to the RSPCA. And I got a card for them saying that I was Jeremy's guardian angel over Christmas while he looked for his forever home. And I thought about it for a couple of days, and I didn't know whether I was ready to get another cat. And then I called the RSPCA and I said, is Jeremy a real cat, or is this like a generic photo that you send out? And they said, no, he's a real cat. And I said, well, I want to adopt him. And he was in the Hunter region, which is about 4 hours north of Sydney. So they put me through to them. And I said that, I wanted to adopt him. And they were very reluctant at first because he has what can only be called psychological problems. He was a little kitten that was adopted out from the RSPCA, and then they heard he was being abused, and they brought him back at 3 months. And this is now 2 months later, and he is this timid, scared little thing. And so they wanted me to foster him for a couple of weeks to see if we could live together. And then at the end of 2 weeks, I just called them and said, I want to adopt him. So it's an interesting journey because they drove him down on New Year's Day from the shelter up north, and they had his little cat box and blankies and stuff like that. And the guy told me that he needed to be in a room by himself with the litter and food in the room and the blankie, and not to disturb him, right? So I did that for 2 weeks. And then as soon as I adopted him, I put the litter in the bathroom. So he's only being fed in the bedroom now. And he's very, very, very frightened. And although he has come to my bed and sat there for a while, he loves his cat tree. In fact, he's sleeping in it at the moment. So we're starting our 3rd week together. But when I was giving him treats in bed the other night, I accidentally brushed his ear, and he totally freaked out. He's hypervigilant, except when he's sleeping. He's hypervigilant. And he meows a lot all the time. And I can't really understand the circumstance. I mean, obviously for breakfast and dinner that I get and treats and stuff, but, I'll just walk by him and he'll start meowing. And I just wish I knew what it was that he wanted to talk to me about. But, he's a darling. This is going to take a long time. When cats are abused, as was Gypsy, it's muscle memory for them. And, it's just going to take a long time for him to realize that this is his forever home, and I live in,
and that he's safe, and that he's safe with you. Tell us a little bit about Gypsy. I know that your relationship with Gypsy was very up and down, and that there were some physical encounters, that there were times where Gypsy reacted physically, with some physical aggression against you. Tell us a little bit about Gypsy and how you came to adopt her and what she was like.
Well, I took a friend of mine to the Cat Society, which is a no-kill shelter not far from where I live. My friend didn't have a car, so she wanted to get a kitten. So I said, well, look, I'll drive you there. And while she was downstairs playing with the kittens, I just had this flash, and I said to the nurse there, where are the older cats? What's the cat that's been here the longest? And so she took me upstairs. She took me to Gypsy, and she said, this is a cat that's been here the longest. She won't be touched. You can probably touch her sort of between her ears, but she won't be touched. She's mean, and, we're a no-kill shelter, so she'll spend the rest of her life here. So she'd been there for 2 years already in this basically tiny little cage. And I mean, it wasn't abuse or anything. She just, didn't have a life. So I said,
No, wait,
well,
I'm going to, and this is where, because I do want to say, um, as a person who loves animals, and I've lived with animals my entire life, and obviously one of the great joys of living with an animal is that tactile pleasure of petting an animal, of petting a cat or a dog, having them snuggle up with you. And so you were signing up from the get-go for the possibility of never having that with this cat who was not in danger of being put down. And so I'm sure you're getting to that part of the story, but I'm curious to know what it was, what made you say to yourself, this is the cat that I'm going to bring home.
well, it was arrogance because I said, I'm a cat whisperer. I can fix this cat up. No problem. Right.
How'd that work out for you?
Well, it's very interesting because she knew she was loved. She knew she was safe. She had been so badly abused that by the time they got her to the shelter, the vet had to pull out all but 3 of her teeth because they were so rotten.
Oh, that is awful. That is really upsetting to hear.
Yeah. And her backstory basically was she was a house cat and they got a puppy and she didn't get on with the puppy, so they threw her out. And I don't know how long she was outside for, but I think she'd been on the street for quite some time.
Oh, they literally just threw her out of the house one day. Just put her, opened the door, shoved her out and said, "You're on your own now."
Yeah, that's a story that I heard. Yeah. So, so I really thought that, I knew I could provide a loving home for her. And she actually they told me she had kidney problems. And I thought I was taking an old cat home to die.
Sure.
And that was like a karmic thing, that I was going to give this cat for however long she lasted.
Which is in and of itself a lovely, lovely thing to do, by the way.
Thank you. Well, I didn't see it like that. I just saw it as I do believe that that animals come into our lives for a reason. And Gypsy, if I hadn't gone upstairs and asked for the oldest cats, I would never have had her. So it was, I don't know. I just was, drawn upstairs. So, kittens are easy to adopt. There's no problem there. But I thought, who's the oldest cat, So anyway, so I brought her home, and at the time I was living in a little studio, a really tiny little studio, and she would sleep on the bed because basically that was the only soft thing in the studio. And
so she was not a friendly cat, but the two of you were really forced into proximity with each other.
Correct. And, I fed her and I just vibed love. And she would sometimes, like when I was going to the kitchen, and it happened in this apartment too, which is a large 2-bedroom apartment, which I moved into 3 years ago. I'm walking to the kitchen and she'll just attack me, bite me, scratch me, and she'd really have a go at me. There were actually a couple of times when I was quite scared, actually, that I thought she was going to do serious damage. She'd lock onto my leg and wouldn't let go. And I'm like, how do I get this cat off me without hurting her,
Sure.
And so a couple of times I had to sort of grab her around the waist, which was the only way I was sure she couldn't bite me or anything, and get her off my leg and take her into the bedroom and just close the door and let her calm down. And there are other times when she bit me and scratched me, and then she'd look at me like she didn't know why she'd done it. She it was like there was this look of horror on her face, and it was I took great care of Gypsy. I used to say I lived in Gypsy's world. From time to time I'd give her sashimi, and I always gave her, sometimes I gave her chicken. I always gave her a little taste of anything I was eating. She loved blue cheese. And
sashimi and blue cheese doesn't sound bad to me, by the way. You're giving me ideas for dinner.
No, absolutely. And we had this ritual at night where we'd climb into bed and I would give her a treat. Those, I don't know, you probably have them there, fancy feast kisses, where the treat is in a tube and you have to squeeze it out.
Yeah. We have something similar. Yeah.
Right, yeah. So we used to have this nighttime ritual, and as soon as the lights went out in the living room, she scampered down the hall to the bedroom. We get into bed, I'd give her a treat, and she never attacked me in bed, not once ever.
I do want to ask because, and I'm sure it's the same in Australia. Here, most no-kill shelter, if you adopt a cat from a no-kill shelter and it does not work out, certainly if there's physical aggression and such that you feel you cannot keep the cat, they will take the cat back. That is an option. It's obviously not something that you necessarily want to encourage, that somebody brings home a cat with the idea that you can bring the cat back like you're returning something to Amazon or something like that. But certainly in a case where there's physical aggression and where cat's bites can inflict real damage. I'm sure I'm not alone among people listening. I have been to the emergency room a couple of times with swollen hands. I mean, from cats who I love, and, getting the tetanus shot and the infected hand or arm or whatever the case may be. So it is a legitimate concern. And I wonder if there was ever any point at which you thought to yourself, maybe this isn't going to work out. Maybe I should bring this cat back to the shelter. And if not, if that never was a consideration for you, why you think it is that you never thought of that. Or either way, I mean, whether you thought of it, and obviously you did not end up bringing Gypsy back, but I'm just wondering if that was ever a thought process that you had.
Well, no, it never crossed my mind, actually, not for a second. And in fact, my girlfriend from Los Angeles was visiting just before the pandemic. And Gypsy had a go at me one night. And my girlfriend Lauren's like, "Oh, my God, how can you put up with that?" And I said, "Well, what am I going to do? Give her back?" And I was sort of joking because it would never cross my mind to return an animal to a shelter. And, I just knew that Gypsy was never going to be, that sort of cuddly, tactile thing. Although once I moved into this big apartment, she would occasionally come and sit on my lap and I could pat her. And in the wintertime, she loved my velour dressing gown, and she used to lick it and climb on my lap with that. And she definitely got it. She definitely got that she was safe with me. And I took a photo of her once in front of the heater, and a really good friend of mine who's been a cat person all her life said, that cat is so relaxed. She knows that she's safe. So it was good to hear it from someone else. But all I ever wanted was for her to be happy. I just wanted her to feel at peace. The great thing was that I took her to my vet for something, I think just to get her nails clipped. He had to put her under sedation to clip her nails. And I asked if he would do a blood test, and he got the information from the cat shelter. And he said, they've read a marker wrong here. There is nothing wrong with her kidneys. And I was so happy. It was like one of the happiest days in my life, because I'd always thought, at any time she could like die. And so there was I guess a sort of sense of relief in me that I didn't know I was carrying around. And I have a feeling that it might have been like, because I had a different vibe in the house, that maybe Gypsy felt a little more comfortable or something. I don't know. But she definitely, after about 2 years of me not touching her, definitely knew she was safe and crawling on my lap, and I could pet her. I couldn't. The only time we snuggled up in bed was about 2 weeks before she died. And she started letting me kind of put my arm around her head and sleep that way. But she was never a tactile cat, although there were a couple of times when people would come in and she'd really take to them. Like, I have a friend, Jess, and she really took to her. And I think that's because Jess is vegetarian. I don't know why I think that, but I know that vegetarians have a different smell. So that she was always very happy to see Jess. And I mean, whatever made her happy made me happy, really. So that's basically the story of Gypsy. I mean, as I said, there were a couple of times that I was really quite frightened that she was going to do serious damage to me, but she never did. She was able to calm down, and it's just muscle memory. As soon as she felt herself getting close, she knew she had to withdraw, and she had to fight. She had to fight for her survival, and that's what she was doing.
Sure. What I find interesting in listening to you is that for as much as Gypsy was sometimes aggressive toward you, and the two of you did not spend a lot of time cuddling until closer to the end of her life, which I do want to talk about in a moment. But it is also very clear that you loved her. And so I'm curious, just purely on that level of what you get out of your end of any relationship, let's say, what was it that you got from? Did you just love her because she was yours, or what was it that you loved about her and about the relationship that the two of you had, which was not a typical cat human close relationship?
I'll tell you something. As I said, we had this nighttime ritual where she'd run up the hallway and jump on the bed waiting for her treat. And it used to give me so much pleasure to watch her go into this sort of like drugged out trance state, like she was in a fantasy world while she was eating this treat.
Oh, so good. It's so good. Like that.
It just used to give me so much pleasure to see her do that, to know that at some point in her day, she was going to be transported. And that used to make, I have shivers down my spine. I mean, that used to give me so much pleasure to see her so happy like that. And it was only for 10 or 15 minutes a day, but I knew at that time she was transported and she was very, very happy. So
what a hard life. I mean, she'd obviously had a very hard life before she came to you. And sometimes there is that feeling when you look at a creature who had such a terrible life, and that you have provided them sort of a warm port in the storm, I guess. That it's a very moving thing.
It is. I know. I feel sort of upset talking about it because she was like the strangest cat I ever had, and I missed her terribly. There was, in fact, towards the end, as she was getting sick, I wish she'd lash out at me. I wish she'd bite me, because that would mean that she was sort of normal or like not sick or not on her way out or anything. So, it was. In fact, the night before she died, she ate her treat, and it was the first time she'd ever eaten it without gusto. And I knew at that point that was pretty much it. So,
but I think there's also, I mean, certainly a cat who's been a fighter and then is sick and not feeling as well is obviously not going to fight as much in part because they're not feeling as well. But I think there's also this kind of bottom when it really comes down to that sort of bottom line. I think that's when an animal really makes that internal decision that where deep down they know that you love them and can be trusted, and all of the other things that were on top of that in the day-to-day, while they had it within themselves to always be cautious and aware, to be tough, they kept up that facade. It was definitely, and my cat Scarlet was also a very aloof cat with just about everybody but me, and she and Lawrence had a lot of issues when we first all started living together. But toward the end of her life, she needed enough physical care that Lawrence had to help me. It was a 2-person job. And she started, it wasn't just that she let Lawrence come near her. I would come in sometimes and see Lawrence just reading the newspaper in bed, and Scarlet would be leaning up against his leg all of a sudden. And it was like when push came to like Scarlet, fine. She didn't want to live with this guy. She didn't understand why all of a sudden we need to live with, I think she thought Lawrence was just like the newest, biggest cat that I was forcing into her life. But when push came to shove, she did have to acknowledge that he was a good guy who was on her side. And I would imagine that the same was true of Gypsy, that it wasn't just that she was too tired, but that she had always understood that you were her friend, that you were there for her.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And, I mean, I really like made a conscious effort to just vibe love and peace. And, I never wanted anything from her. It was real unconditional love, as it is with Jeremy. It's the same thing that he's very, very timid. He's hyper vigilant. As soon as something moves, he's like on it. He's quite terrified. He is quite terrified. I can tell that. And it may take a very long time for him to come round. And he's only a baby. He's only now about 6 months old. So I'm sure he will come round, because at some time his muscle memory will fade of being abused, and he'll realise that I've been there all along, although maybe he never will. Maybe this is just who he is, and that's how he's going to be, and I love him unconditionally. I mean, of course I'd love to cuddle with a cat. All of my cats until Gypsy and Jeremy have been little cuddlers. And, sitting on my lap while I was working, or lying in bed on my chest or whatever. And it is a different relationship, but I have no expectations. I mean, when Gypsy started loving those treats, there'd been nothing in her life that transported her. I mean, I could tell she was okay. I could tell she was okay by the fire. I could tell she was okay sitting on the couch. If she wasn't on the couch, she'd be in the bedroom. I mean, I knew she was okay. But for those few minutes of that treat, I knew that she was the happiest cat on the planet, and that was great. And I started giving them those nighttime treats to Jeremy, but I don't always do it in the bedroom, because I don't want that to be a cue like it was for Gypsy. I want him to never really know when it's coming. So do you know what I mean? It's like,
sure.
He's still really timid, so his food is still in the bedroom. The first week he was under the bed. The second week he was on top of the bed. And as soon as he is, he's not ready to eat in the kitchen yet, but he will be at some point when the hypervigilance is over and he doesn't feel he has to protect his food. I'd really rather that he ate in the kitchen and not in the bedroom. But that's going to be totally his call. When he's ready for it, I'll know that he's ready for it, and I can move his food.
I think sometimes, and again, and I don't want to draw too many parallels insofar as, again, Scarlett had not been abused to my knowledge. She was really only 3 or 4 weeks old when I took her. But she was also a very aloof cat. And it was a few years before she became cuddly with me. Although we did arrive at an understanding pretty early on. Once I got past, she was the first cat I'd ever lived with. And and I had grown up with dogs. So once I got past my expectations of what an animal, especially a kitten living with me, was supposed to be like. And I actually wrote this in My Life in a Cat House. But one of the lessons that I really learned from Scarlett is that, yes, it is wonderful. I think any animal lover adopts an animal feeling that this is going to enhance their life. I couldn't imagine my life without any animals in it. But the real reason to adopt a cat or a dog is to give them a good life, and on whatever terms those may be. And it is sort of almost as a reaction or incidentally to that your life becomes better, but they are not there to entertain you or to make you feel a certain way or to behave in the ways that you want them to. The obligation is really the other way. You have to be there to give them the life that they deserve on the terms that they need.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when I was in LA, I had this baby little kitten. A guy brought Kitty into where I was working, and he found them in a box. And there were 3 of them, and I took one, and I talked to 2 other people who I worked with into taking them. Neither of them had ever had a cat before. And these kittens were so young. A week, 10 days, and they really needed like hand feeding and And definitely Kitty cuddled up to me. I mean, the first night she slept on my pillow and she never left. And Shirley in New York. I mean, Zara, excuse me, in New York, and Shirley in Miami were always cuddly cats who always loved sort of curling up next to me or on my lap or something. So it's to have two cats that are not like that, where I've made the choice to take them on. It's just, yeah. I mean, I have, I don't have any children, and even though I've got nieces and nephews, it's not the same thing. And my cats are really, they get the love that I would have given to a child, I suppose. And they're, I just, as I said, I just vibe love, I vibe comfort. I make sure they've got plenty to eat and anything they want. And they are in my world, so I can be in their world.
Do you feel that it's, and I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, I really am curious about this, because again, going back to Scarlett, I always felt that because we had to sort of get to know each other, it was not just you're my person, you're my cat, and we're now in love. It was a real process over a period of time where we we had to learn to grow into a kind of relationship. And I always say that I loved all my cats the same. I love them equally in different ways. But that was really the bond that I had with Scarlett, was that it was a relationship that we worked toward over a period of time. And that really was its own unique thing because we the two of us, based on our specific personalities, had to build it together. And I wonder, because I know that you lost Gypsy recently, and I do know how devastated you were. And I think a lot of people listening to your story would say it was lovely that she accepted this cat who abused her and attacked her and didn't cuddle with her. But how much of a loss is that really? And obviously I know how devastated you were. And so there was obviously a unique and special bond between the two of you. And I wonder if you think it was because of or despite the fact that it was a little bit of rough going initially.
Well, my feeling is that you love someone for who they are, not in spite of it. And
well said, by the way. Very well said.
Thank you. I loved her. I still miss her terribly. I still go into the bedroom expecting her to be on the bed. And Jeremy will never take her place. I love Jeremy already. He's only been here 3 weeks and he's just this darling little thing. But my relationship with Gypsy was so different than any other cat I'd ever had before. And I knew that I was giving her something she'd never had before. And it was a very, very, very special relationship. I mean, even my vet used to sort of say, ask me like how I coped, because, as I said, he'd have to put her under anesthetic to even clip her nails. I mean, she just would not be touched. And although she did over the years allow me to touch her, but it was always her call. Like she climbed onto my lap, or she climbed into bed close enough for me to touch her, or whatever. It was always her call. And I have to remind myself with Jeremy, he's so cute and so young, and I have to remind myself that he has to come to me. I can't reach out for him, that it's got to be his call when he's ready. And but my bond with Gypsy was very, very special. I mean, because I knew that I had taken her from this sort of almost feral monster to someone who could be hand-fed treats at night. So, it was a very special. And not that I haven't loved all my cats, as you say, and I feel like I love them all equally, but I had a very special relationship with Gypsy. And as you know, I was devastated when she got sick and ultimately died. I mean, I cried for 3 weeks nonstop. I mean, everyone at work was kind of like, well, we were working from home because of the pandemic, which was a good thing because I could be with her all the time. But yeah, I mean, when I lost Gypsy, I'll just backtrack. Because I've lived in so many different places, I've usually left my cat with someone and moved on to like another city, or well, usually another continent, with the exception of my New York cats. That was Zara and Alice, and I took them to my ex-boyfriend's home in Argentina, and they lived out their lives on the farm, so they were very happy. But generally, I was the one that had left, and it never crossed my mind what it was going to be like without Gypsy. I was like so focused on making sure she was okay and was comfortable, and it just never, because it's never happened to me before. I'm the one that's left, but this time I was here by myself without Gypsy, and it wasn't depressing. It was just overwhelmingly sad. It was just sad.
No, that first loss is the first one of my cats who I lost, there is a special pain when it's the first loss. The first one of my cats I lost was my cat Vashti, and that was the hardest one. Again, not because I loved her the most, but because I was really not prepared. Sort of, I had never been through it before, and it really, it is just this wave kind of that overwhelms you and really knocks you down and takes the wind out of you for a little while. But I'm wondering, and you know, before we wrap up, I and this is something you and I discussed before we started recording, but just this idea of maybe, you know, if there's anybody out there who's considering taking on a special needs cat, or particularly a cat with psychological or emotional special needs, then we would have done a good thing here today if we can kind of tip the balance in that cat's favor. And so what would you say to somebody who's listening to this and thinking, you know, it sounds like a wonderful and noble and rewarding thing to do, but I'm not sure if I could stand to live with a cat who didn't like me or didn't want me to touch them? What would you say to someone who's considering this but is maybe on the fence?
I would say be very, very, very clear that you don't expect anything back. That's what I would say. You have to understand that this is a cat that's may never give you what a bond with an animal gives you, and you have to be okay with that, and you have to want to give this cat a fabulous life. And if you don't think you can do that, don't do it.
Would you say, and I feel like I know the answer to this question, but it bears saying, would you say that in your particular case that ultimately it was worth it?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, my bond with Gypsy was extraordinary, and I'll never ever forget, you know, the beautiful happy moments she had. And I think with Jeremy, when they said that he had, you know, psychological problems, and they didn't want me to adopt him without living with him for a couple of weeks, I just knew that the universe had brought him to me. I mean, when you think of all the planets that had to align, it started with my friend who made a donation to the RSPCA. You know, and then I called them, and then, you know what I mean? There's so many planets that had to align for Jeremy and I.
All great love stories are meant to be, right? They always have that sense of being fated.
Yeah, exactly. So that's, you know, I don't know if he exactly chose me, but I definitely chose him knowing that there would be the quote unquote normal limitations. And maybe I had to go through that with Gypsy in order to cut Jeremy a wide berth. I don't know, but it doesn't feel unnatural to me. It feels like, yeah, sure, why not? You know, I'll take him, I'll look after him. But as I said, you've got to have no expectations. I mean, there are times when I've wanted to reach out to him because he looks like he's peaceful enough. Like at the moment, he's sleeping in the cat tree. And there are times that I think, oh, yeah, I could just give him a little cuddle, or, you know, give him a little, pet him or something. And then I have to remember that I absolutely cannot touch him, that he has got to come to me when he's ready to do it, as Gypsy did.
Oh, such excruciating self-control not to pet a kitten that's in the room. You are a better woman than I am. And I don't know if I could manage it. Melanie.
Well, the one or two times that I've actually done it without thinking, he's been so terrified that I'm like so conscious of it now.
Now, of course, that makes it easier to not scare him. Well, listen, I think we all certainly wish you and Jeremy many long and happy years together and a growing bond. And thank you so much for coming on the podcast and telling us your story.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really a pleasure to talk to you. We haven't really had a chance to chat. Although just one thing I will say, Gwen, before we leave is you sent me an absolutely beautiful letter when Gypsy was dying. And I gave a copy of it to the specialist who was looking after it at Sydney University and to my own vet. And I said, if you have anybody that has a cat that is on its way out, please show them this letter.
Well, I see. I almost had this urge to make a joke like, oh, I just found that in a fortune cookie. You took it seriously, but no, seriously. It really is, I think, the most universal experience that we all go through, right? As I mean, it is all of our relationships and are as different ultimately as all of our individual cats are, but the end in a way is always the same, I think, for all of us. And and I had been through it, and I was very sorry for your loss. I really was. But I thank you for coming here and talking to us about it. And
absolutely. And, if any of your listeners want to talk to me about it, they can, find me on Facebook or, you feel free to give them my contact details.
Sure.
And, they can tell me what their fears are, and I can either allay them or tell them I don't think they're ready. Not that I'm an expert on it, but
you will probably be the only Melanie Morningstar on Facebook, I'm guessing. I was thinking of Marjorie Morningstar, but that is...
There's actually a Melanie Morningstar in Canada who is American Indian or Canadian Indian.
All right. So anybody listening, you should not, if the Melanie Morningstar you find on Facebook is in Canada, then you are looking for the Melanie Morningstar in Australia.
Right.
Thank you so much, Melanie, really for coming on the podcast. And when it is safe to do so someday in the distant future, please give Jeremy a pat on the head for us.
I will. Absolutely. It will be my pleasure.
And thanks so much to all of you for listening. I look forward to seeing you next week. And that concludes this episode of Curl Up with a Cattail with Gwen Cooper. Don't forget to invite your feline-loving friends to listen to new episodes along with you. If you'd like to subscribe to this podcast, find out how to get your name and your cat's name included in my next book, or leave comments or questions for me to answer in future podcasts, head on over to gwencooper.com now. Thanks so much for joining me, and don't forget to hug your cat today.